In the heart of Lagos, where the sun blazed down mercilessly on tin roofs and corrugated iron sheets that shimmered like molten silver under its relentless rays, life pulsed with an energy both chaotic and intoxicating. The streets teemed with activity, hawkers shouting their wares, buses honking impatiently, children darting between cars in pursuit of tips or scraps. Above it all, the air buzzed incessantly with the hum of generators, a constant reminder of Nigeria's fragile power supply. Yet amidst this cacophony, tucked away in a modest two-bedroom flat perched above a row of bustling shops, lived a family that seemed like any other. Ada, a 34-year-old mother of two, was the backbone of her household. Her days began before sunrise, when the sky was still painted in hues of indigo and gold. She would rise quietly, careful not to wake her children, and prepare for another long day at the market. Her small food stall, nestled in one corner of the sprawling Tejuosho market, was her pride and joy. There, she sold everything from spicy jollof rice to steaming pots of egusi soup, her hands moving deftly as she served customers who hailed her cooking as some of the best in the area. Ada's smile was warm, but behind it lay years of sacrifice and resilience. She had built her life brick by brick, determined to give her children opportunities she herself had never known. Her husband, Chinedu, worked long hours as an accountant in one of Lagos' burgeoning tech startups. He wore his suits with pride, often boasting about how he was helping shape the future of Africa's digital economy. To outsiders, he appeared successful, a man climbing the ladder of ambition with quiet determination. At home, however, he was distant, preoccupied, his mind always elsewhere. Still, Ada clung to the hope that beneath his stoic exterior beat the heart of the man she had fallen in love with over a decade ago. Their children were the light of their lives. Amara, bright-eyed and curious, was 8 years old and already showing signs of being a voracious reader. She devoured books borrowed from the local library, her imagination fueled by tales of faraway lands and heroic adventures. Tund, mischievous and full of boundless energy, was 5. His laughter could fill even the darkest corners of their home, and his antics often left Ada torn between exasperation and amusement. Together, they formed a picture-perfect African family. Hard-working, God-fearing, united, at least, that's what everyone believed. But perfection is often just a mask. It all began with something so mundane it barely registered: a missing pair of socks from the laundry line. Ada had noticed them gone one morning as she hung up freshly washed clothes. "Did you take my blue socks?" she asked Chinedu casually during breakfast. He shrugged, muttering something about thieves or carelessness, his attention fixed on the newspaper spread across the table. Ada let it slide, chalking it up to the chaos of everyday life in Lagos. Then came the misplaced phone charger. One evening, after a grueling day at the market, she reached for her charger only to find it missing. "Chinedu, have you seen my charger?" she called out. He glanced up briefly from his laptop, shaking his head. "No idea," he replied absently. A few days later, she discovered an empty bottle of palm oil she swore she bought only days ago. "Who used up the palm oil?" she asked aloud, frustration creeping into her voice. Chinedu didn't respond, engrossed in a call on his phone. It wasn't until later that night, as she folded his freshly laundered shirts, that she caught the faint scent of perfume clinging to the fabric. Not hers. Ada told herself she was overreacting. After all, Lagos was chaotic. People borrowed things without asking, didn't they? And men sometimes smelled like cologne because, well, wasn't that normal? Yet, deep inside, doubt festered like a wound left untreated. She tried to push the thoughts aside, focusing instead on her children and her work. But the unease lingered, gnawing at the edges of her mind. One evening, after another exhausting day at the market, Ada returned home to find Chinedu unusually cheerful. He greeted her at the door with a kiss on the forehead, a rare gesture these days, and handed her a bundle of Naira notes. "For the kids," he said with a smile. "Buy them whatever they want." Ada stared at the money, confused but grateful. It wasn't until later, when she tucked Amara into bed, that unease crept back in. Her daughter clutched her favorite doll tightly and whispered, "Mama, why does Daddy always go out late at night?" Ada froze, her hand pausing mid-stroke as she smoothed Amara's hair. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "He leaves after we're asleep," Amara murmured sleepily. "Sometimes I hear him talking outside with someone." The words hit Ada like a slap. She dismissed it quickly, telling herself Amara must have been dreaming. Still, sleep eluded her that night. When Chinedu finally slipped into bed beside her, pretending to be asleep, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. Days turned into weeks. The signs grew harder to ignore. Late-night calls, hurried texts he deleted before she could see, and the way he avoided her gaze during dinner. One afternoon, unable to bear it anymore, Ada followed him. Chinedu drove to a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of the city, parking near a modest apartment complex surrounded by tall trees that swayed gently in the breeze. Ada watched from a distance as he stepped out of the car, straightening his tie. A woman emerged from the building, a tall, elegant figure wrapped in a flowing Ankara dress. They embraced, laughing softly, before disappearing inside together. Betrayal burned through Ada like fire. Tears blurred her vision as she sat there, gripping the steering wheel of her rickety second-hand car. How dare he? With everything they'd built, everything they'd sacrificed. How dare he? That night, Ada confronted him. Her voice trembled with rage as she accused him of infidelity. At first, Chinedu denied it vehemently, calling her paranoid and accusing her of mistrusting him. But when she revealed what she'd seen, his face crumbled. For a moment, guilt flashed across his features, but it was fleeting. "It's not what you think," he stammered. "She's just a friend." "A friend?" Ada spat, her voice rising. "A friend who kisses you? Who shares your bed?" Chinedu fell silent, unable to meet her eyes. In that moment, Ada realized the truth. This wasn't some fleeting mistake. This was betrayal, cold and calculated. The next morning, Ada went to the market as usual, but her mind was elsewhere. The vibrant colors of the produce, bright red peppers, golden yams, and deep green leaves, blurred into a haze before her eyes. She moved through the crowded aisles on autopilot, her hands mechanically arranging trays of food and serving customers without truly seeing them. Each transaction felt like an echo in a cavernous void, distant and hollow. She couldn't shake the image of Chinedu and that woman together, the way they had laughed, the ease with which their bodies fit against each other. It replayed in her mind like a broken record, each loop more painful than the last. Every glance from strangers at the market felt like judgment. Every whispered conversation seemed laced with mockery. Was it written all over her face? Could people see the cracks beneath her carefully composed exterior? When she returned home later that afternoon, the house was eerily quiet. Tund was playing with his toy cars on the living room floor, while Amara sat cross-legged on the couch, engrossed in a book. But something felt off. The air was heavy, charged with an unspoken tension. Her suspicions were confirmed when she entered the bedroom. Chinedu stood by the wardrobe, stuffing clothes into a battered suitcase. His movements were deliberate yet mechanical, as if he were trying to convince himself this was the right thing to do. For a moment, Ada froze in the doorway, her heart pounding so loudly she thought it might burst out of her chest. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice trembling despite her attempt to sound calm. Chinedu didn't turn around immediately. When he finally did, his expression was grim, almost guilty. "I'm leaving," he said simply, avoiding her gaze. "I can't keep living a lie." Ada's stomach dropped. Her knees buckled slightly, but she forced herself to stay upright. "You're choosing her over us?" she demanded, her voice breaking. "Over our children?" He hesitated, his jaw tightening. Then slowly he nodded. "I'm sorry," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. And just like that, he walked out the door, dragging the suitcase behind him. The sound of the latch clicking shut reverberated through the house like a gunshot. Ada stood frozen, staring at the empty space where he had been moments ago. Her vision blurred with tears, but she refused to let them fall. Instead, she sank onto the edge of the bed, clutching the sheets until her knuckles turned white. Weeks passed in a haze of anger and despair. Ada threw herself into work, determined to provide for her children despite the ache in her chest. She woke up earlier than ever, arriving at the market before sunrise and staying late into the evening. Her hands moved mechanically, chopping vegetables, stirring pots, serving customers, but her mind rarely strayed far from the pain gnawing at her insides. The community whispered behind her back, speculating about what had gone wrong. Some blamed her, saying she hadn't been enough for him. Maybe she nagged too much, one neighbor murmured to another, loud enough for Ada to overhear. Others pitied her, shaking their heads at Chinidu's selfishness. "A man who leaves his family is no man at all," an elderly woman declared during a church gathering, casting a sympathetic glance in Ada's direction. But Ada kept her head high. She refused to let bitterness consume her, even though it threatened to swallow her whole some nights. After putting the children to bed, she would sit alone in the dim light of the living room, staring at the walls and wondering how everything had unraveled so quickly. How could someone she loved, someone she trusted, betray her so completely? Then one fateful evening, as she prepared dinner, there was a knock at the door. Startled, she wiped her hands on her apron and opened it to find a young boy standing outside. He couldn't have been older than 10, his clothes dirty and patched, his face streaked with dirt. In his hand he clutched a torn piece of paper. "Are you Mrs. Ada?" he asked timidly, his voice barely audible over the hum of the generator outside. She nodded, confused. "Yes, I am. What is it?" "This is for you," he said, thrusting the note into her hand before turning and running off down the street. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the crumpled paper. Written in shaky handwriting were 3 words. "He has a son." The revelation sent shockwaves through Ada. Her breath caught in her throat as she read the words again and again, trying to make sense of them. Scrawled on the back of the note was an address, a location in a part of Lagos she didn't recognize. Her first instinct was denial. Surely this was some cruel prank, a fabrication meant to hurt her further. But deep down she knew better. This wasn't coincidence. It was truth, ugly and unavoidable. Determined to uncover the full story, Ada tracked down the address the next day. The journey took her to a neighborhood on the fringes of the city, where the roads were unpaved and lined with makeshift shacks. As she approached the building indicated on the note, her heart sank. Poverty hung heavy in the air here, a stark contrast to the bustling energy of Tejuosho Market or the polished offices where Chinidu worked. When she arrived, she saw the boy sitting on the steps of a crumbling building, playing with a makeshift toy car carved from wood. He looked up, startled, as Ada approached. "I'm here to see you," she said gently, kneeling to meet his gaze. "And your mother?" The boy hesitated, his wide eyes filled with uncertainty. After a moment he nodded and led her inside. The apartment was small and sparsely furnished, but clean. A weary-looking woman greeted her cautiously, suspicion etched into her features. She wore a faded wrapper and held a baby on her hip, rocking it absently as she studied Ada. "I'm Ada," she began, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "I think we need to talk." "Ngozi," she introduced herself haltingly, listened silently as Ada explained why she was there. "I know what my husband did to you," Ada said, her tone measured but firm. "And I know he left you both behind. That's not fair, to you or to this boy." Ngozi blinked, taken aback. "Why are you here?" she asked finally, her voice tinged with suspicion. "To rub it in?" "No," Ada replied firmly. "I'm here because this boy deserves better. We all do." For days Ada wrestled with her emotions. Anger, sadness, disbelief. Betrayal upon betrayal. Lies upon lies. Yet amidst the storm, a quiet clarity began to emerge. This wasn't just about her pain anymore. It was about the lives caught in the wreckage of Chinidu's choices. The boy, the innocent child, didn't deserve to be collateral damage in this war of egos and broken promises. One morning, Ada dressed Amara and Tund in their best clothes and took them to Ngozi's apartment. When they arrived, she found the boy sitting on the steps again, playing with the same wooden car. This time, however, he smiled shyly when he saw her, recognizing her from before. Inside, Ngozi greeted them with cautious curiosity. Over cups of tea sweetened with condensed milk, the two women talked openly for the first time. They shared their stories, not just of Chinidu's betrayal, but of their own struggles, their dreams, their fears. Ada learned that Ngozi had grown up in a rural village, moving to Lagos in search of opportunity only to find hardship instead. She spoke of raising her son alone, of scraping together enough money to feed him each day. As the conversation unfolded, Ada realized that Ngozi wasn't so different from her. Both had been betrayed by the same man. Both were trying to raise children alone in a city that demanded more than it gave. In sharing their stories, they found strength they didn't know they had. Eventually, Ada made a bold decision. She invited Ngozi and the boy to move in with her and her children. It wasn't an easy choice. Space was tight, resources were limited, but Ada believed it was the right thing to do. Together, they could build something stronger than any one of them could alone. At first, tensions ran high. Amara and Tun struggled to adjust to having another sibling in the house, while Ngozi wrestled with feelings of inadequacy and guilt. But over time, the household transformed into something unexpected. A patchwork family bound not by blood, but by resilience and mutual support. Months later, Ada stood in the doorway of their modest home, watching as the children played together in the yard. Laughter filled the air, a sound she hadn't heard in what felt like forever. Ngozi joined her, holding 2 cups of tea. "You've done so much for us," Ngozi said quietly. "I don't know how to thank you." Ada smiled, sipping her tea. "We're thanking each other," she replied, "by surviving." In that moment, Ada understood something profound. Life's greatest betrayals can either break us or teach us how to rebuild. And sometimes the most powerful act of revenge isn't destruction, it's creation. By choosing compassion over bitterness, she hadn't just healed herself. She'd given her children and Ngozi's son a chance at a brighter future. Chinidu's absence still lingered, a scar that would never fully fade. But Ada no longer cared. She had built something far greater than the life he had destroyed. Something real, something whole. And in doing so, she proved that even in the face of betrayal, love can find a way to flourish, if only we have the courage to let it. Over the next few weeks, something remarkable happened. Ada began visiting the boy and his mother regularly, bringing food, clothes, and school supplies. At first, the woman resisted, wary of Ada's intentions. But slowly, trust grew between them. They started talking, not just about Chinidu, but about their own struggles, their dreams, their fears. Ada realized that the woman, Ngozi, was not so different from her. Both had been betrayed by the same man. Both were trying to raise children alone in a city that demanded more than it gave. In sharing their stories, they found strength they didn't know they had. Eventually, Ada made a bold decision. She invited Ngozi and the boy to move in with her and her children. It wasn't an easy choice. Space was tight, resources were limited, but Ada believed it was the right thing to do. Together, they could build something stronger than any one of them could alone. At first, tensions ran high. Amara and Tun struggled to adjust to having another sibling in the house, while Ngozi wrestled with feelings of inadequacy and guilt. But over time, the household transformed into something unexpected. A patchwork family bound not by blood, but by resilience and mutual support. Months later, Ada stood in the doorway of their modest home, watching as the children played together in the yard. Laughter filled the air, a sound she hadn't heard in what felt like forever. Ngozi joined her, holding 2 cups of tea. "You've done so much for us," Ngozi said quietly. "I don't know how to thank you." Ada smiled, sipping her tea. "We're thanking each other," she replied, "by surviving." In that moment, Ada understood something profound. Life's greatest betrayals can either break us or teach us how to rebuild. And sometimes the most powerful act of revenge isn't destruction, it's creation. By choosing compassion over bitterness, she hadn't just healed herself. She'd given her children and Ngozi's son a chance at a brighter future. Chinidu's absence still lingered, a scar that would never fully fade. But Ada no longer cared. She had built something far greater than the life he had destroyed. Something real, something whole. And in doing so, she proved that even in the face of betrayal, love can find a way to flourish, if only we have the courage to let it.